Hello and welcome to my second game devlog. In this episode I'll be going through how I managed to achieve the toon look for my characters, as well as optimizing the game scene and figuring out the best way to display shadows. For instance, to make my character more cartoony, I'm using a matcap shader. It lets me combine the character's material with a texture like this one to create custom lighting and shadows on the character. You often come across outlines in toon-styled games, and they tend to help differentiate the characters from background elements and overall make it look better. The outline shader I'm using in the main menu for the characters adds an outline to all objects on a specific layer, in this case the player layer. If you want to create similar outline shaders yourself, I basically follow tutorials from Ned Makes Games on YouTube. If you want to learn how to create custom shaders using HLSL, it's definitely worth checking him out. In the game scene with the camera being top down at an angle, I couldn't get the same crisp toon look on my character as I did in the main menu. Even with several different light sources in different directions, it never really looked right. I ended up setting the character's matcap shader to unlit in this scene, and it really gave me the result I was looking for. Since the characters didn't need any light source anymore, and since light and shadows can generally be pretty expensive to render, especially on mobile devices, I decided to make the whole game scene unlit. With the lighting gone, we can turn off shadows, light probes and reflection calculations on the mesh renderers. A quick way to test out performance of the assets you use in your game is to check the statistics box while your game is running. For instance, I noticed that even with just the walls, ground and some boxes, my game scene's batch count was 108, the triangles in the scene were 187,000 and the set pass calls was 60. If you don't have any clue what these mean, you basically want these to be as low as possible for your game to run smoothly. I noticed the high triangle count in my scene was due to the imposter low poly walls that were actually high poly, at almost 17,000 triangles. Just by replacing these walls with another wall asset that came in the same asset pack as the boxes, I got rid of 183,000 triangles and 48 set pass calls and batches. Further on in the development, I'll be going through how to decrease it even further. In Brawl Stars, the character doesn't actually generate any shadows, which could mean that they're also going with the unlit approach. However, when looking at the environment, you can clearly see that the map obstacles and some of the environment produce shadows. Since they have probably gone with the unlit approach, it would mean that they have created fake shadows using sprites or quads and put them on the objects. If you have played the game before and have a keen eye for details, you have probably noticed that the map's environment is always facing the same way. This basically means that if you spawn on the, let's call it, away team's side, the entire map will flip to make it look like you're always on the home team's side. This also means that the fake shadows will be flipped and therefore always face the correct direction. I'm using Unity's tile map system to draw my obstacles on the map. Within the tile palette window, I can set the brush to game object and drag in my obstacle prefab. After setting the offset position and scale of my prefab, I can start placing the objects in the scene view. To create the fake shadow for my box, I'll be adding a sprite game object to it. I will position it at the bottom, just slightly above the ground, and add a slight offset that will represent the shadow direction. If we lower the alpha and head into the scene view, we can see that the fake shadows work, but there's a slight problem. Parts of the shadows that overlap will be displayed darker, and we don't want that. The quick way to fix this is to create a new material and set the shader to UI default. Then in the inspector, set the stencil comparison and stencil operation to free. Then assign the new material to your shadow sprite. This stops the overlapping parts from becoming darker, but depending on your camera angle, it can look worse than before. To get this working as intended, we're gonna need a custom shader. So let's go ahead and shamelessly borrow one from Stack Overflow. I'll paste the code into a new unlit shader that I'm gonna call Shadow Shader. Even though it's not going to be used by the shader, I'm gonna need a main texture in the property field, since I'm gonna use it on a sprite. Now if we create material from the shader and apply it to our sprite, we can see that the shadows indeed work as intended. Changing the alpha of this material will set the shadow strength of every object with a fake shadow. To set a different shape of the shadow, we simply go into the sprite renderer in the obstacle prefab and select another sprite. Here you can see gameplay where I have set up a simple scene with the obstacles placed identically on both sides. By doing this, we can flip the parent object of the obstacles and nothing will change except for the shadows. Since I only flipped the obstacles right now, if you look closely on the floor, you can notice that in one of the videos I started on the flipped side. And by the way, if you wanna use the props from this scene in your own project, you can get them for free on the asset store. A crucial part for the maps in Brawl Stars is the grass that you can hide in to become invisible to the enemy team. I couldn't find a suitable asset for this and ended up creating this monstrosity of a 3D model in Blender to use as a placeholder for now. I smoothed it out a bit inside Unity to make it look more stylized without increasing the triangle count. Then after adding a material using the matte cap shader, it ended up looking something like this. I set up a new prefab with it and created a new layer for it, and then started filling out the map with grass on a new tile map. I think that will have to be it for this devlog. In the next one I'll be showcasing the weapon system and setting up new projectiles and particles. And lastly, the current placeholder name for the game is Valor of Thumps, that was suggested by Felix. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you have any pointers on stuff I can improve on, please let me know in the comments.